Hey there, this is Elias Whitfield, and this is the Freedom in Leaving podcast, where I talk about what it really takes to build a life somewhere else. Is South Africa really the evil villain the media paints? The headlines are horrible, the protests are violent, the looting and the deaths very real. No need to sugarcoat it. The South Africa xenophobic attacks spanning the May to July 2026 protests were the worst since similar attacks occurred back in 2019 and in 2008. However, I do strongly challenge the recent branding that South Africa or South Africans are rabid xenophobic people attacking poor innocent immigrants. So to channel the late broadcaster Paul Harvey, here is the rest of the story that almost universally gets completely ignored or underrepresented by overzealous media outlets, creating blaring headlines and beaming protest videos all across the world. This is really a broke versus broke or a poor versus poor issue. This is not a black versus black issue. This is not a South African versus the rest of black South Africa issue. Poverty is the real culprit here. Combined with illegal immigrations and its drain on the local resources like schools, hospitals, and housing, and with unemployment reaching 30% for some groups, many poor South Africans have not moved forward like their middle class or wealthy brethren have in many other parts of the country since the end of apartheid. Far too many still live in crowded, substandard housing in townships, informal settlements, and in decayed rural or urban areas. Now, admittedly, there has been major mismanagement and poor governing of the country by its leaders. And then comes this massive wave of poor immigrants from other African countries, some fleeing for legitimate safety reasons, who flood into South Africa. In fact, these immigrants bypass every other nearby country they could easily reach for safety and for economic opportunity. Instead, they make a deliberate and direct beeline several thousand kilometers south to South Africa with its spirit of Ubuntu. I am because we are. A spirit that reminds us of our interconnectedness. But what is really happening is that a whole new population of broke residents is now living aside the current population of broke natives. And this is where the real division starts. The new immigrants often bring in shared but sometimes questionable financial resources from their home countries. They start building small shops, then invite more of their former countrymen to join them in South Africa. But here's the major rub here. The economic prosperity they are building is not shared or spread around. It stays firmly within the hands and community circles of the new immigrants and their family and friends. Now, here is a perception on the ground. Right or wrong, here's what locals are seeing and feeling. The locals see immigrants who won't hire South African natives in their own land, but only hire their own family and friends from back home. They see investments that flow to fellow immigrant businesses and never back to the local communities that welcomed them in the first place. Then it gets darker. Some locals point to a rise in crime, illegal firearms, human trafficking of young girls, and illegal drugs, all said to trace back to cartels from the very countries these immigrants are fleeing. I want to be very straight with you. I cannot prove this pipeline exists, and neither can most of the people repeating it. But truth and evidence often lie in between, often hiding in shades of gray where both sides could actually be true, and yet nothing is still resolved. In fact, Human Rights put out a report in May 2026 called New Waves of Xenophobic Attacks. In it, they say there is no real evidence that immigrants are behind the crime wave people blame them for. Now, I'm not saying the researchers are right and the folks on the ground are wrong, and I'm not saying the other way around either. But right smack dab in the middle of this anger, this he said, she said, they said, Sometimes what the studies show and what the people actually feel and see with their very own eyes just don't line up. We need to question everything. There's always an agenda lurking somewhere. Now, here's my honest take. The truth is probably sitting somewhere in between. But here's what we do know. There is an influx of new residents into a country already grappling with internal infrastructure issues, such as water, electricity, and roads. And it often impacts the most vulnerable communities. The anger towards the government and its lax immigration rings the loudest. And here's the topper right here. When their visas end, but immigrants do not go home, they end up working under the table, often at much cheaper rates, not paying taxes, but still taking full advantage of free health care and adding to overcrowded classrooms and increasing the competition for housing. Put it together, it creates a powder keg of anger, resentment, and aggression towards them. Now, let's be very, very clear here. Protests are legal and completely warranted, but physical violence, bullying, property damage, and murder are not the answer, never will be the answer. What you are seeing is the poorest of South Africans fed up with their government allowing loopholes and the lack of immigration enforcement on top of years of prior mismanagement. So, what do I think needs to happen? Well, it's not very complicated at all. Speed up the asylum process so people are not stuck in limbo for years with no answer. Enforce the visa and immigration rules that are already on the books instead of looking the other way. Put real money into water, power, and housing in townships so folks have somewhere to put their anger besides a shop owner from another country. None of that takes a genius to create or to figure out. It just takes a government willing to do the work instead of talking about it. So the next time you see a headline about alleged xenophobic attacks in South Africa, think about everything we just discussed. Understanding the context and the background is worth a whole lot more than jumping on the worldwide mainstream I hate South Africa media bandwagon they want you so desperately to climb upon. And that is it for this one. If I hit something in you and you want to reach out, please do. And if you want to order or read my book, The Freedom in Leaving, links are in the bio. The book is being released in October 2026, but there are plenty of podcasts and essays and video for you to read upon, feast upon until then. My website is thefreedominleaving.com. Again, thefreedominleaving.com. And also, touch back here again pretty soon for more podcasts at my Substack.